All right, we are down to our last session today. Thank you all for joining us for this final session. We have with us today, we have Paul Brann, who is an assistant fire marshal for the Middletown, Connecticut Fire Department. And he's also joined by HAI Group Senior Risk Consultant, Nick Mayo. And they are going to talk to you today about fire-related water issues and multifamily housing. They're going to be discussing on how we can hopefully mitigate some of the water damage that we have been seeing when these fires have been occurring in the units. So I'm going to hand it over to Nick to get us started.
Okay, everyone. Thank you very much for taking your time to be with us this afternoon. Again, we'll be talking today about fire-related water damage, which is the purpose of this presentation is to talk about addressing water damage due to either fire suppression activities or an accidental discharge of a sprinkler system. So again, my name is Nick Mayo. I'm a senior risk consultant here with HAI Group. I'm also a lieutenant with the City of Middletown Fire Department when I'm not in the office. Sitting with me today is one of my colleagues from work. Again, his name is Paul Brann. He is an assistant fire marshal with our fire department. He has over 20 years of service in the fire service. So hopefully the perspective that we're going to give today not only will be from my perspective as a risk control consultant, but also we will be able to give some feedback and some ideas, both being in the fire service. We'll be able to give a perspective of, obviously approaching an emergency on a fire apparatus. And then the good thing is today, Paul will be able to give a little bit of feedback coming from the fire prevention side of the business and also the investigation side. So hopefully from these three different perspectives, we'll be able to get some information to you all. If you have any questions, by all means, please ask. We'll do our best to answer the questions. And if you have any follow-up for us, my contact info will be listed at the end of the presentation. So that being said, we'll get into our presentation, what we're going to learn today. We're going to learn the importance of pre-fire planning for all of your buildings on site, the importance of having a proactive friendship and relationship with your local authority having jurisdiction. Now, we're going to be talking a lot today about the authority having jurisdiction, and what that means is the organization, office, or individual who's going to be responsible for enforcing code within your municipality. We'll go through the actual definition later on in the slides, but it is a term that we're going to be using a lot today. Also, how to deal with fire-related water damage. So that's either potential damage from fire hoses or activated sprinkler heads, and also the options for stopping water flow from a sprinkler head. Later on, we'll bring up a prop that we have to show how to stop water flow from a activated sprinkler head. And also we'll talk a little bit about how to follow up with your AHJ for further recommendations. So what's at stake? Why did this presentation, come about, and the conversations that brought up the need to have this discussion? Since 2016, housing organizations have filed dozens of property damage claims due to water issues from fire suppression sprinklers, with approximate total losses of over $12 million. Now, that's our experience as an insurance company. Damages average just over $150,000 per claim, highlighting why it's so important to plan for fire-related water issues. In saying that, what happens a lot of times, you may have a small kitchen fire that goes from your stovetop into your cabinets, and above your cabinets may be a sprinkler head. If that sprinkler head activates, that loss went from a few $1,000s being, maybe a new stove, a new range hood, and some new cabinets over your stove appliance, to maybe thousands, hundreds, and maybe millions of dollars in a claim due to a water loss. Let's say if this happened on the 10th story of a high-rise building and water got down to the first story. So that's the information that we have. That's why this presentation came about. So hopefully you'll be able to take away some key takeaways to mitigate fire-related water issues from either an actual fire if it does happen, or if it's an accidental discharge of a sprinkler head. So what fire doesn't ruin, water will. So if you've ever witnessed a structure fire, you know that we as firemen, we come in, we might break windows, open walls, and cut holes in an affected building's roof to extinguish the fire. These are things that we have to do. We get called to the scene, obviously, to put out the fire. Our incident priorities are going to be life safety first. Then we're going to stabilize the incident. And then after that, we are going to try to conserve as much property as we can. As firemen, we will apply water to the building and surrounding areas, which we call exposures. You can see a statistic here. On average, a fire in residential structure requires 2 or more hose lines coming off a fire engine. While fighting fire with 2 hose lines for just 5 minutes, we can spray more than 1,000 gallons of water into that structure. A single hose line can pump out 80 to 125 gallons of water per minute. So it's important to know that, yeah, we're there, we're putting out the fire depending on the structure, depending on what's burning, but the amount of water that we may need to put out that fire is going to be substantial. So afterwards, dealing with that water and mitigating that the water that comes from a fire, it is important to talk about, and that's going to be some key areas that we talked about today. Do you have anything to add?
Not so far.
Okay. Okay, so how water is applied to a structure if it is burning. So how water is applied and for how long depends on the building construction, the property's layout, the burning material, and how long the material has burned. Whatever the process is, the water volume, as I said, will be significant. The good news is that you can mitigate the resulting damage with proper planning. Proper planning is something that you will do in coordination with your local fire department, and they will most likely direct you to an individual like Paul in the fire prevention division. So in the following slides, we're going to get information on how to do that, how to approach that, and what are some key takeaways when pre-planning a building when it comes to dealing with fire emergencies. So when talking about pre-fire planning, risks are easier to manage if you have a plan in place before the disaster strikes. Written within your emergency operations plans that you have within your organizations, there should be an area, an aspect to deal with fires pre and post event. Firefighters can say, as firefighters, we can save more lives and protect more property if we know the property's layout, construction type, occupancy, and other important building features. A better plan can also potentially lead to less damage. So to caveat that, enlisting the help of your local fire department to develop an emergency response plan is extremely important. One thing that we can do as firefighters in coordination with a property owner, a property management company, or a building owner is scheduling a walkthrough of your property. When we do a walkthrough, as representatives of the fire department, we'll identify the construction characteristics of your building. So if it's a 2.5-story townhouse, is it a 3 or 4-story non-combustible building? Is it a fire resistive high rise? These are important considerations for us as a fire department. So we will identify construction characteristics within that building. We'll try to identify locations of fire hydrants and additional water sources and fire department connections on the building. This is important for us because obviously as we come into the structure, if it is on fire, we like to have a plan of a first due engine company and a second due, along with truck and rescue companies, of where they're going to go to the best advantage for that building. One other thing that we'll also do is we'll locate the building's fire protection equipment room and main water supply. We always like to know where in the building is the fire protection room, where are the main shutoffs for water, electrical, and things of that nature. So the important features within the building, when we do a walkthrough, these are good for us to know, because God forbid we're going there in a fire emergency. We might have to do it in smoky conditions or, in an area where we're not going to be able to see. So knowing where that fire protection equipment room is is extremely important. Walking through the building, if there is any fire protection system, isolation valves and shutoffs, we'll go through and take a mental note of that, because as a fire department, which we'll talk about later on, being able to close an isolation valve if there is an activated sprinkler head, and makes our job a lot easier if the fire is under control. So in saying that, Paul, if a building owner, property management company, a housing authority wants to contact a fire marshal's office to schedule a walkthrough, what's some information that you would need, or how would you approach that part of a request coming from a person?
We would probably want to know what type of occupancy it was, maybe what it was being used for, residential, commercial, what have you. And really, that's about it. We'd be responsible for coordinating it with the shifts. We work on shifts in Middletown, so it would be getting our 4 shifts through the building, and showing them the important aspects of the building that Nick touched on in the previous slide. Transparency is probably the best relationship that you can have with your local fire department. The more we know about your property, the faster we are going to be able to mitigate an incident at your property. So that's probably a good thing to keep in mind, is that we are here for you and more than willing to help you with any question or issue that you're having, regardless of how small or minute you may think it would be. But as far as scheduling walkthroughs, that's really a very easy, simple thing for you to coordinate, whether you call the Fire Prevention Bureau or the fire department itself and speak to somebody. They'll put you in touch with the right person to get that done.
And I can't stress enough, especially with a walkthrough, my perspective, arriving on an engine company is different than Paul's perspective walking through on an inspection. But as a building owner, it's good to hear everything that I may have to say and everything that I will ask. And also the same with Paul, because he may be seeing things and identifying things that I'm not looking at. So typically when we do a walkthrough, especially in our city, like Paul said, all 4 shifts will go through the building. And by the end of the week, each shift will point out something different that maybe another shift had missed. And we share that information. When we went to call it, 1 Main Street, did you see that the fire department connection was on the front side of the building? Yep. Did you notice that, on the rear side of the building is the fire protection equipment room? Yep. And we share that information. And then if you have any questions for, fire marshals like Paul, that's a perfect time to ask. They can review your plans, talk about your plans, and give recommendations.
And I just want to add, Nick just touched on a very important subject of marking important things. I do want to stress what Nick said with marking of fire department connections, sprinkler rooms, electrical shutoffs, water shutoffs, anything that would help mitigate damage in your building, we should be very familiar with. So.
No, that's a good point. That's definitely a good point.
Nick, we actually have a question in, and it is, what are examples of issues that prevent transparency?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is, I think as a building owner, you might be a little hesitant to invite the fire marshal into your building because you're afraid they might find a code violation, and then that may result in a penalty and things like that. So I think that's probably the road that they're going down. But I mean,
yeah, that seems to be one of the biggest roadblocks that we hit as far as having relationships with property owners, is they automatically think that once the fire marshal gets there, that he's going to walk through the building, he's going to nitpick every little code violation that he finds, and those code violations are then going to go back and cost the property owner tens of thousands of dollars, which really isn't the case. Like I said before, we're here for you. So if you're calling us with a specific question, or you want us to come to your building for a specific reason, we're usually going to stick to that. If we see something blatantly obvious, obviously we're going to say, you probably want to have this fixed, and here's some suggestions on how you could do it. But that's probably one of the biggest issues concerning our relationship as far as a fire department with the public.
People, you don't be afraid to invite them in. Again, if you're inviting them in, then I would assume, and granted, I can speak for Paul, when building owners invite us in, we show them the professional courtesy of, yes, there may be things you need to address, but since you invited them in, then I know that the fire prevention division will work with that building owner and things like that. Okay.
On the flip side of that, Nick,
Yep.
what if there is a fire department that just says that they're too busy, or there's a kind of an issue with the relationship? Any tips on how to improve that relationship going forward?
So in the grand scheme of things, an important thing to note is across the country, obviously there's different fire departments. There's always the career versus their volunteer, large municipality, large city versus small. I would think, a smaller town or city that is stretched for resources, it might be a little more difficult for them to go out and do an inspection or do a pre-plan because maybe they don't have the time. But I would assume the larger cities, like if we talk about like a New York or a Boston and things like that, I mean, their fire prevention division it's very large. So there shouldn't be an issue. Now, granted, in this post-COVID world, I think everybody's a little behind with inspections. And I know, with Paul, if you go in his office, he's got paperwork stacked up, a mile high because, the past 2 years, they haven't been able to go out and do their inspections. So to have a proactive relationship, it's really, you start by reaching out to the fire department. What can the fire department offer? What are some trainings that they can do? Do they offer training? But when it comes to knowing your building, I don't think I've ever met a fireman that says they don't want to know what a structure looks like before they want to go in, because I think the scariest thing for us is going into a structure that's, completely, dark and smoke conditions, and we don't know where we're going. So inviting a firefighter in might be a little easier and a little more easier for you than versus inviting a fire prevention division in. But I think honesty is the key.
And I would say that we kind of went down the path of focusing on the fire marshal's office to do these kinds of things. And in reality, Nick and I have a lot of the same training. He knows what I know. He may not know as much of the code side as, say, a marshal or a deputy marshal, but really any firefighter will be able to come into your building and get you started on the right path. And like Nick said, there probably isn't a firefighter or a shift or an engine or ladder company that if you're going to invite them into your building, they're going to say, no, we don't have the time, we're too busy.
Yeah, they definitely, it's one of the best things we could have in our back pocket if we're going into a building and we know
It benefits
where we're
us
going
just as much.
Yep. So.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, so also in your pre-fire planning, when we talk about water damage, when we're doing a walkthrough, now this is more some feedback and information that as a property owner, housing manager, you can kind of lean on the fire marshal's office, but you're looking for any major mechanical systems in the building that could be affected by a large volume of water. So in a high-rise structure, again, that fire on the 10th floor, if that fire gets in the elevator shaft, it's going to damage that elevator. And, let's say you only have 2 elevators in your building. If one goes down, that could potentially be a big problem and also a costly expense, not only for you, but then us as an insurance company as well. So mechanical systems being elevators, electrical systems, boiler rooms and things of that nature. Doing that walkthrough to identify that kind of stuff, to see if there's any kinds of protective measures we can put in place. That's important to know in your pre-fire planning. Can you use plumbing features in the building to remove excess water? So let's say it's an accidental discharge of a sprinkler head and you're trying to clean up water out of a unit, can you remove maybe a toilet from a bathroom to get that water out of the unit? Can your maintenance personnel do it, or possibly a disaster mitigation company on scene? Can they use plumbing features such as floor drains to get that water out of the building? Also, do you have a large supply of equipment on hand for water cleanup? So this is something that should be completely separate in a separate area of the building, or maybe a maintenance shop where the inventory is there. We're talking about mops, squeegees, buckets, brooms, and things like that. Because, after this emergency happens, let's say if it's an accidental discharge, there's going to be water, and there's going to be a lot of water. So getting that water out of the building is extremely important. So the only way you're going to know what mechanical systems, what plumbing features you have, what equipment you have, is by doing a walkthrough of the building. And in talking to Paul just before this presentation, do you want to talk about that water collection device that you had mentioned?
We were just talking about simple devices that are out there, and Nick has a couple of them that'll go over with you shortly. But we were talking about accidental discharges in high-rise buildings on the upper floors where water would flow down into the subsequent floors. And I said, have you ever seen the tarps that you can actually clip onto your ceiling grids, and they kind of come down into a collection point with a little fitting for a garden hose, and you can then hook up the garden hose and put the garden hose down a drain or out a window or wherever you need it to go away from your building to kind of mitigate that situation.
Mhm.
So that's just kind of one example.
Yeah, there definitely is a lot of equipment out there, and I would think a simple Google search would kind of lead you to that. But typically from a firefighter perspective, during our salvage and overhaul process, once the fire is out, we're going to try to protect things. We always try to cover, building valuables with tarps. We may create some type of water chute if there's a large volume of water, but having that type of equipment that can collect water if it's coming through ceiling tiles and then get that water out, it's just another part of your pre-planning that the equipment's out there, and I would think a little bit of research, you'll be able to have it on hand.
And on the planning aspect of that, depending on the layout of your building and what you have in your building, maybe having multiple cabinets with things like that is the best idea. Because say you have a server room or something like that, you're not going to have to run across the building to get the water supply, the water stuff, to bring it to the server room. You probably want to have multiple things. So that kind of falls into having an emergency plan, knowing what you have, and then knowing how to use it.
Exactly. Okay, so what can you do during your pre-fire planning? As Paul mentioned before, use bold signage. Your fire protection equipment rooms, your elevator rooms, main electrical rooms, your fire department connection on the outside of the building. One thing with that fire department connection, there should be bold signage that indicates whether that fire department connection is feeding a sprinkler system, a standpipe system, or both. Especially for responding agencies, that's extremely important, because we need to know what the water we're sending from our fire engine going into the building is feeding. So if we think it's feeding a standpipe, and in reality it's feeding a sprinkler, we're trying to put the fire out with the standpipe system, we're not feeding it with any water. So having that signage is extremely important. Storing keys to your fire protection rooms in a key vault is extremely important. So having a key vault on the outside of your building with fire department access and with the building keys that we would need in an emergency is extremely important. Inspecting your fire protection equipment, per NFPA standards, consulting with a disaster mitigation company beforehand. So having a relationship with a company, so you can, post-fire, post-event, you already have that vendor's name on file, you can call them. That is extremely important. Ensuring your organization's management and staff are familiar with your building's layout and emergency plan. That might be one of the most important bullet points on this slide. You could have an emergency plan that's a binder, 2 or 3 inches thick, but if the people that work for your organization don't really understand what's in that emergency plan. It's just, collecting dust on a shelf. So the simpler you can make things, it's easier for people to understand, and especially in case of an emergency, you want people to, and your employees, to be able to recollect information on what to do, very quickly and easily, and not have to go to the shelf and take out this big emergency plan that, they have to reference something.
And maybe training on some of that stuff. too.
Correct. So annual training, retraining, updating your emergency plans. That's something that we can do as risk consultants. And that's also something that I know in Middletown, if you wanted to go over your building's emergency plan with a fire marshal, they would do that with a simple request.
Yeah, we will review it.
Okay. One thing that I did want to touch on because Paul is here is when we talk about key vaults on the outside of a building, there's different manufacturers and there's different ways that you can go about it. But let's say a building owner or a property owner did not have a key vault on the outside of their building. How do they go about making that request to get a key vault on their building?
So again, you'd reach out to our office or your fire marshal's office, and you would ask them what manufacturer they prefer. So I know for us in Middletown, we prefer the Cadet brand. And basically we'll give you a sheet that lays out the steps of how to go onto their website. You register, you put in the city or town that you're in, and the company making the box, in our case it's Cadet, will have a specific key for all of the boxes in Middletown. So it's a very, very easy process. We kind of spell it out for you. And a lot of people think it's a big expense. It's not. These boxes are maybe $120.
Mm-hmm.
But in the grand scheme of things, spending the $120 on the box is a lot cheaper than delaying a response because you guys have to do forcible entry or something like that,
Exactly.
replacing a door or a window. So,
Yeah.
But getting the boxes is a very simple process. And again, reaching out to your marshal's office will make it that much easier.
And then as you review your emergency plans, it's always good that once a year, you open up that key vault on your building, make sure all the keys are in it. The key for your fire protection equipment room, the key for your elevator room, the key for your electrical room.
And clearly
label those keys. Yep. All right. Thanks, Paul. Okay. So talking about sprinkler systems, now we're going to get into kind of the nuts and bolts of the presentation in regards to sprinkler systems. NFPA 13 is the standard on the installation of sprinkler systems. Just a quick briefing on this. The purpose of NFPA 13 is to provide a reasonable degree of protection for life and property from fire throughout the standardization of design, installation, and testing requirements for sprinkler systems. This is based on sound engineering principles, test data, and field experience. So again, depending on how old your building is, whether it's existing construction, new construction, or you're retrofitting, NFPA 13 will be the standard that fire marshals like Paul would reference in regards to either the install, upkeep, and maintenance of a sprinkler system in your building. So in regards to mitigating damage and the potential for sprinkler system discharge, you can install sprinkler protection guards to protect the sprinkler heads from damage following any applicable NFPA and local standards. If your sprinkler heads are exposed and then you can see them, there are guards that are available that, God forbid someone, hits a sprinkler head, it won't activate. You just want to make sure that they're installed so that the sprinkler head still operates properly and as efficiently as it was designed to operate. Verifying whether your sprinkler system is supervised or has flow monitors is extremely important. When we say supervised, that means that the water flow within the sprinkler system either reports to a central monitoring station or a local monitoring station that would dispatch, emergency apparatus. So making sure that fire alarm system is tested regularly, inspected, and operates as it should is extremely important. Because whether it's an activated water flow alarm due to a discharge of a sprinkler head or a bump in system pressure, we still want to go out there as fire department representatives to make sure that everything's okay. And then obviously if water's flowing for an activated sprinkler head due to a fire, we want to get there as soon as possible. And the only way we know that water is flowing is through that supervision of that alarm system. Creating a plan for accidental discharge of water, discussing with staff how to handle an incident, especially those involved in property maintenance and contracted services, is extremely important. So if we know it is a confirmed accidental discharge of a sprinkler head, what's the plan? What are we going to do? And that's what we're going to get into in the following slides coming up right now. So planning for sprinkler system discharge. We have to determine if any on-site staff have experience or training to deal with a fire sprinkler discharge. The most important thing that we can do is consult with your authority having jurisdiction regarding procedure for closing either supply valves or chocking sprinkler heads before touching any part of the system. That goes with saying, when in doubt, ask the fire department for recommendations on dealing with an activated sprinkler head. So if I was a property owner or a building manager, housing authority representative, the first thing that I would do is ask a representative like Paul, what are you comfortable with me doing? The follow-up question from Paul most likely would be, well, what type of building is it? What type of sprinkler system is it? Who on site has experience or training to deal with a fire sprinkler discharge? If no one really has the experience, knowledge, or training, then they're going to say, in emergency or even in an activation of fire alarms, just get out and meet the fire department at the front door. Paul, can you give
Which
a little?
is also very important.
Can you give a little perspective on, let's say, if someone had the knowledge, experience, and training to deal with an activated sprinkler head, would a fire marshal be comfortable with, closing an isolation valve of a sprinkler system for a particular floor?
A lot of that depends on the area of the country you're in. Where we're in Middletown, I know that we would have no problem coming out to the building, meeting the person, having them walk us through the process of what they're going to do. Us being okay with it because we understand, what's at stake with the water damage, what have you.
So Paul's perspective is going to be different than maybe someone on the West
Right.
Coast or someone in the Northwest. Again, your authority having jurisdiction is going to be the one who says, yes, I'm comfortable with you doing X, Y, or Z. So starting, again, it starts with the relationship with the fire department. Once a person feels comfortable, gets some knowledge, gets some experience, and gets some training, perhaps a fire marshal would allow an employee of an organization to close an isolation valve for maybe floor 4, where Mrs. Jones, when she was moving into her apartment, hit a sprinkler head with her mattress.
Now, there is a caveat to that. We would most certainly be fine with mitigating the loss and having somebody shut down the valve. But with that, this can't be an in-house only thing where, like Nick says, Mrs. Jones hits the sprinkler head, the water starts flowing, the maintenance man comes and chalks the sprinkler, stops the water, takes care of the mess, and doesn't let anybody know, because there are codes that come into play where if that sprinkler head is going to be down for more than 4 hours, we need to know about that. Nick's side, the fire suppression side, needs to know about that, because if something else happens within that period of time and Nick's on the truck and says, oh, this building is sprinklered, and they get there and the sprinkler system's down, that's just going to open up a whole new world of problems. So notifying your authority having jurisdiction that there was an incident doesn't mean that somebody's going to come out and write you a ticket or cost you a whole bunch of money.
Right.
It's more of a, okay, we need to plan for this today kind of a thing.
Okay. So again, if allowed and you're certain that the discharge was accidental, that's a key point here. If you 100% certain that discharge is accidental, you can control the flow of water from a sprinkler head per your operating procedures. And again, those operating procedures would go through your fire marshal, fire prevention division, or your authority having jurisdiction. Or one of the best things that you can do is meet the fire department at the building's front entrance to discuss what happened. as responding on a fire truck, if I show up and you're outside and you say, hey, it's an activated sprinkler head on the 6th floor, it was an accident, automatically I can send a team of guys down into the basement to the main water supply valve, and I can send my crew up to the 6th floor and we can shut that sprinkler system down. Instead of finding the fire alarm panel and finding out the floor and where it happened. So advising the fire officials of the floor unit number where the discharge occurred and the location of the fire protection room, isolation valves, and fire alarm panel, it's extremely important. So what are we saying here? Time is of the essence to avoid water damage. If that sprinkler head is flowing and you can't control it, as soon as the fire department gets there, if we know where we're going, then we can get there faster. So isolation valves in a sprinkler system, they're primarily used to control or isolate portions of a building sprinkler system. All valves need to be labeled and identified, but as Paul said, upon closing an isolation valve, a portion or that zone of a sprinkler system will be inoperable. So let's say it's a 10-story building and the 4th floor isolation valve is closed. Yes, now floors 1 through 3 and 5 through 10 still have water going to that sprinkler system, but if in floor A, we had the broken sprinkler head, and then now there's a fire in floor B. Floor 4's isolation valve is closed, and therefore water wouldn't come out of that sprinkler head. So it's extremely important to make sure that your fire department knows if any part of your sprinkler system is touched, closed. We need to be aware of that, and you have that relationship. So hopefully everybody can see this. But what we did here is we built a prop to talk about a device that's on the screen now. So sprinkler head stops. If we look at a sprinkler head, and everybody should be pretty familiar with a sprinkler head, the different parts of a sprinkler head, obviously we have the orifice, which is where the water flows through. This is the threaded part of the stem. The sprinkler, this is the frame of the sprinkler itself. Stopping the water flow will be some type of plug. A glass fusible link will be what's holding that plug back. And then the deflector on the bottom is what determines how the water will be sprayed in the room. Some deflectors may be flat, some may be at a right angle or 90 degrees, depending on how they're installed and the way the water needs to come out. There's a different sprinkler heads for different applications. So the sprinkler head will be in your sprinkler piping. It'll either be 1/2 inch, 3/4, or 1.25 inch piping. That bulb will be a color. The color will be dependent on the temperature in which the bulb will melt and fail for water to come out. As a fire department, if we come and this sprinkler head is activated and we want to stop the flow of water, let's say we can't get to an isolation valve. One thing that we may do is come in with a pair of wooden chalks and wedge them into the sprinkler head so that way it slows down the flow of water. Now I can attest this, and so can Paul. If this sprinkler head is flowing,
it's not an easy job.
It's not an easy job, and the amount of water that's coming out of the sprinkler head, it feels like you're underneath the waterfall. So it's extremely important that between knowledge, experience, and training, if you were to stop flow of water from a sprinkler head, even a device like what's on your screen, I have it in my hand now, it's called a shotgun. It's a ratcheting cam style device that if this water is flowing, I can put the device into the sprinkler head opening, squeeze the lever, and now that water is pinched off inside this sprinkler head, and now this one sprinkler head is in theory plugged up, okay? Now us doing it here in this controlled environment is extremely easy to operate this device. If water was flowing from this, and let's say it's 10 feet up in the air, and now I'm on a ladder and I'm working off a ladder, and you will be drenched and soaked in water. It is a little more difficult.
And not clean water.
And potentially that water could be dirty from sitting in the pipes and corroding the pipes and things of that nature. So use of sprinkler stops like this requires training, requires personal protector equipment. Certain stops may work with one type of sprinkler head, and another type of sprinkler head may require a different type of stop. That's why in the fire service, we tend to just carry, a pair of chalks or a pair of wooden wedges, because it seems like usually this works for us the majority of the time. Or 9 times out of 10, what we do is we take off our helmet and I'm putting it over the sprinkler head until we can find an isolation valve, because we just can't see anything that's going on once the sprinkler head is activated. Okay. So devices are available. They're simple to install, again, when water is not flowing, but then when water is flowing out of them, it does get a little complicated, and that's why training, experience, and knowledge and personal protective equipment is important. So an activated sprinkler system due to a fire. So we talked about an accidental discharge of a sprinkler system. Now we're going to talk a little bit about an activated system due to a fire. This is a little bit different. So obviously in a fire, you want to know your escape route from the building. You want to call 911 as soon as possible, ensuring all building occupants are organized away from fire lanes and fire department access routes, and advise fire officials of any on-hand knowledge you may have about the building or incident. So if there is a fire in your building, you want to fire your emergency procedures, your emergency plan, and things of that nature. So that goes without saying. If it's an activated sprinkler head due to a fire, you don't want to, try to put out the fire if you're not properly trained. So make sure you do exit the building and do it safely, and then you can start your accountability plan for the people that are within your building. So in regards to replacing sprinkler heads, so the help of trained qualified staff members or private contractors can replace any broken sprinkler heads that you may have. Most importantly, remembering to place a sprinkler system back in service. There's some NSBA statistics out there that the majority of time where something goes wrong with a sprinkler system, it's due to the fact that the system was not put back in service properly.
Correct.
So we can have a fire or an accidental discharge. We shut down the water to the sprinkler system. We replace the head, but then we forget to turn the water back on. All right. So that's an earth-shattering statistic out there. Is the majority of time where something goes wrong, it's because the system was not put back in service correctly. If you're unsure of who can handle this, local building officials, your fire department can give you an answer. Paul, offhand, do you know how many spare sprinkler heads within a building people need to have, depending on the type of building they have?
Yeah, so depending on the size of your building and the number of heads you have, we kind of do it on a numbers basis. So 0 to 300 heads, you're going to want to have 6, maybe 7 spare heads. 300 to 1,000, you're going to want to double that to 12. And then 1,000 or greater, you're going to want 24 heads. The majority of the time, your sprinkler contractor or whoever's testing and maintaining your system will mount a box near your sprinkler riser or the main body of your sprinkler system on the wall that's very clearly marked spare sprinkler heads, and they will, give you what you need to replace your head due to a discharge.
Okay, awesome. So the aftermath, moving quickly, I talked about this in the beginning. The faster remediation begins, the better. As we all know, from fire, we go to water damage, we go to mold and moisture problems. Mold spores can start growing 24 hours after water damage has occurred. So whether it's mold, unsanitary water, lead dust, asbestos, electric shock, the health risks to consider after water damage, as you can see on the screen, are going to be pretty significant. So we want to make sure after a discharge of a sprinkler system, after a fire, our disaster mitigation companies that we have a relationship with, we get them there as fast as possible to start the remediation and cleanup process. So that's what I wanted to stress here. It's so important. The faster we can clean the building, dry it out, the better. So again, we never want to re-enter a building after a fire or a water discharge unless fire, building, and health officials say it's safe to do so. So we'll give the all clear. Ensures that all personnel who enter the property are wearing appropriate protective equipment. That goes without saying. And I think after the pandemic, everybody is fairly comfortable with the word personal protective equipment and what's out there in the market. Consulting with a water damage mitigation specialist to remove unsalvageable items, assess structural damage and begin water remediation. That's as soon as possible. And again, when it's safe to do so. One of the most important things to do after a fire or after any type of water emergency, ensure the building's electrical system is inspected. by the building and health department for any water related issues before using power outlets and appliances. We want to make sure if we're plugging in things, we're starting the dry out process. We want to make sure that those outlets are dried out and there's no moisture issues within those electrical systems. So that's extremely important.
And that's probably another avenue or something that you could add to your emergency plan, is not only having a disaster mitigation team logged into your phone, but also having, you know, a reputable electrician, plumber,
Sure.
anything having to do with what could happen in your building, because at 2:00 in the morning, scrambling to find an electrician that will come out and certify that your power is okay to be turned on is not going to be an easy thing to do. So to have all those ducks in a row beforehand is important.
Okay, excellent. So who has the final say? The authority having jurisdiction. Now, I said we were going to define it, so here it is. The authority having jurisdiction is the organization, office, or individual responsible for enforcing the requirements of the code or standard, or for approving equipment, materials, installations, and procedures. So this may be your state fire marshal. This may be your local fire department's fire prevention division. I mean, Paul works in a fire marshal's office, and we have 4 fire marshals on staff. The authority having jurisdiction will have the final say on approval for your pre-plans for any type of water or fire emergency. And again, as risk consultants, we can always take a look at those plans as well. You know, we're more than happy to do that. We're more than happy to help you get in connection with your local fire department and emergency officials. We definitely enjoy reaching out to them to get their perspective. So the authority having jurisdiction is the one who has the final say. I can give her a recommendation and give advice, but again, that has to go through the AHJ for final approval when it comes to planning for any type of fire or water emergency. Additional resources that we have through our risk management center online. So if you haven't been in our risk management center, it's like it's our landing page for all the resources that we have. So a lot of the information from this presentation will be in the fire-related water damage, 10 do's and don'ts for dealing with fire-related water damage, and what to do in a fire, resources that we have on our website. I can't stress enough that you can contact your risk consultant here at HII Group to help out, along with, you know, reaching out to people like Paul or your municipal fire department, emergency services. You know, they're a resource that is available 24/7. So, you know, reach out, have that relationship, make sure it's a proactive relationship. So that way, if you have a question, you can pick up your phone, you're already on a first name basis with them. And they'll be able to get you the information that you need as quickly as you need it. So my contact information is here up on the screen. My email address along with my phone number and extension. So if anybody has any questions, by all means, they can reach out to me. Again, if you had questions maybe for a fire marshal's perspective, you can email me. And I work at the firehouse tomorrow. I'll see Paul tomorrow. So he can always give questions answer questions from his perspective. So if you need a resource, please reach out, and we'll get any information and answer any questions that we can. So Beth, I don't know if there's any more questions that came in through the chat, but we appreciate everybody's time today, and hopefully you took away some information and gained some valuable resources to help deal with water damage when it comes to a sprinkler system discharge, or us as firefighters coming on scene and putting water in the building and put out a fire.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. It was definitely excellent to get a different perspective from just the insurance side of things, like we usually will speak to. So thank you so much for that, Paul.
You're welcome.
And we just have a comment of just saying that they thank you. They really appreciate the insight and additional practicality.
You're welcome.
So that ends our conference for today. And on behalf of HAI Group, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today for our third annual virtual risk management conference. We hope that you found this sessions valuable and educational. I'd also like to thank our speakers and vendors who share their knowledge, insight, and experiences to make us all more effective risk managers. If you haven't done so already, feel free to download the supporting materials from the vendor pages as a resource for your organization. We will also be emailing out the session recordings to all of those that registered for the conference. We will also be including the slides from the presentations as well as those recordings. And also, as Nick mentioned, be sure to visit HAI Group's Risk Management Center for additional resources by logging into our company website at www.housingcenter.com. Please also take a moment to fill out our conference survey by clicking on the link that we're going to be providing in the chat. Your feedback is greatly appreciated and will always help us improve our conference. Lastly, if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, your risk control contact, or an account manager here at HAI Group, and we're always happy to assist you in any way that we can. Thank you again for joining us and have a wonderful day.